So it's been a good market. We've got a really interesting card here to show you guys about what's happening today and last week compared to the week before, and kind of same song, second verse. 2611 new listings versus 2741. 2741 was probably a little bit higher because you're still kind of tapering off of the following month, and so that's a normal number that we would expect to see.
Back on market, we had that grew by about 6% last week from 588 to 630. The interesting one that stood out to me was the next line where it talked about the price decrease, and there were 14% of the houses last week that had price decreases.
Yep, and it's interesting, kind of going back on market, that 630, which is an increase. I think that you and I were talking a little bit earlier about why would something come back on the market, and I think we've got buyer's remorse, and I think there's also a point right now in the market when people realize that they are paying it some of the top dollars, and homes at that need to be in top dollar condition.
Yeah, and the under contract that went into the option period fell 10% last week from the week before. So I think, but part of this is seasonal, I feel like.
Right.
Part of it is also, I think, what we're experiencing with some of our clients right now is just there's a little bit of buyer fatigue in having to work so hard and compete for property.
I agree with you 100% on that one. When we look over at the pending markets, not much of a change. There's been 3113 versus 2938, which is not terrible large bump, but still we're seeing, more of them that are moving into the pending number.
Yeah, and solds were up just a little bit, which, I guess for the middle of the month is a little bit different, but maybe they were just, closing over in the middle of August. So who knows? Coming soons were down just a smidge, down about 8% to 352.
So overall, it's a traditional market that we would see in the August timetable. Again, we'd love to see a few more homes coming on the market, given at the rate that they're being absorbed. There's some interesting news that was out on Twitter talking about kind of across the board when you look at the United States and break it into different segments, that the number of days on market pretty much has decreased, with the South, which we would be in, down by 22 days versus last year at the same time.
Interesting. Our one of the things I read this week that was really interesting is that the two housing markets with the highest number of home starts this year are both in the Texas market. One is the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and the other is the Houston area. Each one of those have had over 50,000 home starts this year. And the next one down is 35,000, and I think it was Vegas maybe. But they're really, really trying to build here, and that supply chain kink is really throwing things off quite a bit.
Lumber prices are no longer peaking, so that's really interesting. That should begin to soften some of it. It'll be interesting if that actually trickles down into the cost of new homes, but I think the absorption rate still is so high that we may see little to no effect on that. One of the other things that we've noticed in the market is the changing in what a listing agent and a seller are asking for when it comes to making an offer. Sometimes this makes it really easy, helps button up some of the paperwork a little tighter, which is great because it kind of makes it easier for sellers to execute contracts. But some of it was really telling in how these offers may be being put together. It is interesting. There are a lot of documents where they're asking people to fill out, and it's interesting because it doesn't actually have to partake or have to be legitimately part of the contract, but they're asking if you've terminated on a contract, if you're working with other buyer agents, and if you have multiple offers out on other properties, all trying to figure out who's the best candidate that'll make the best offer and get it to the closing table for them.
Yeah, some of these are really interesting to me because, when they probably reared their, I'm going to call it the ugly head because I don't like them, but they kind of reared their head a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, when listing agents began uploading these documents with, they call them offer instructions. And I have seen some, like there's one that is done by a really good friend of ours. She and her team put it up every time, and it is here's how we communicate. Here's the best way to reach us. Here is the seller, the seller's name to include on the contract. Here's how we'd like you to fill out the back page. And it's done in a very helpful manner.
Right.
But some of these are like, the seller requires a waiver of appraisal document with their contract. You have to close at ABC Title Company, and many of these agents don't realize the position they're putting their seller in
Right.
by trying to dictate that, because there's a Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act that there's questions whether a seller dictating that, unless they are paying all of the title expenses, and I mean every title expense, there potentially could be a violation there. And, a lot of times when those violations happen, I don't want to be the test case. That is not the fun part of it. So
It is interesting, but sometimes I feel like you and I are in a situation where the company that we work for is so agent focused on making sure we're so educated and that this information is always brought to us. And I think that if you look at a large portion of the agents that work in the DFW area, they're not always part of these groups. And so as a smaller broker or just a flat fee, they don't always know what's going on. And so I think that sometimes these offer letters are speaking to agents, even new agents, that don't quite understand everything. I always think it's funny when they say page 9 of the contract must be filled out completely.
which is the page that has all of the realtor's information in it. We've received offers time and time again where the buyer's agent fills in their side of the contract and doesn't bother to fill anything in on the other side, which is just
But I almost
crazy.
would prefer for them not to know to do that, because I want to know who I'm dealing with up front, and if you're so lazy that you can't even fill in 6 more lines, I guess I'm knowing who I'm dealing with right away.
Well, we
So-
we do a certain amount of due diligence every time we get an offer on one of our properties, and I feel,
It is.
it's really interesting what we find sometimes. So,
Or what we don't find.
or what we don't find.